Hey guys, so I'm going to admit it has been a little bit of a rough stretch for me going into the finals and stuff at school. So I have not been able to make consistent Monday videos and I'm very sorry. I've been going so good there for a while, but I figured I could at least bring you guys a quarterly wrap up of the first quarter of this year. And it's a doozy. I read 23 books in January, 20 in February, and 18 in March. And as we see my time slowly start to slip away from me, we see those books go down. So these normally end up being pretty long videos. I will link to relevant reviews when I can. And I'm sorry, sometimes I just don't remember much about the romance novels that I read, and particularly because they were just filler, essentially, when I can't sleep at night. So, without further ado, the first book that I finished in January was a history book. It was Our First Civil War, Patriots and Loyalists in the American Revolution by H.W. Brands. I talked about this in a previous supplementals video. You can check that out. But essentially, the short summary is that I thought this would be a more interesting and nuanced look at the patriots and loyalists in America during the American Revolution. It's often a very one-sided conversation. However, it was mostly just like a lot of primary sources put together without much context. So interesting if you like primary sources, not so much if you were interested in anything investigative, I guess. Then I went and read a fantastic romance novel, which I buddy read with Michaela. That was Electric Idol by Katie Roberts. This is the sequel to Neon Gods. This is her second book in her reimagined Greek gods series. Neon Gods was Hades and Persephone, and this one was Eros and Psyche. So this one was so different in tone from Neon Gods, much more cinnamon roll, a little bit less dark, but just as good. Highly recommend. Then I finally finished Wildland, The Making of America's Fury by Evan Osnos. This is without a doubt one of the best books that has come out of my reading challenge series. And it is a 10-year look at the rise of the just deep feelings and emotions from this incredible moment of unity after 9/11 to whatever is happening in this country now. And Evan Osnos situates it in three to four places in the United States where he has actually lived, grown up, and worked and seen evolve over that period of time. It is incredible. I talked about it in the same supplementals video as the H.W. Brands, so you can check that out for more. I then read two books by Kristen Callahan. Kristen Callahan wrote this book series, the VIP series, that I really liked. She has a duet that's Dear Enemy and Make It Sweet. I remembered that these involved recipes. There was something about cooking in these. I don't remember much more. The VIP series is still definitely where it's at. Then there was Misfire, Inside the Downfall of the NRA by Tim Mack. I read this book because Tim Mack contributes to the NPR Politics podcast, but he was one of the first people to do some of the major investigative reporting about the NRA and its relationship with some Russian agents that were caught up in the Mueller probe. So it is a longer look at the NRA and its revolution, and then a lot about the stories that he reported last year and the year before that. The structure leaves something to be desired, but as someone who doesn't know or didn't know anything about the NRA, I did find it interesting to learn about this organization that does have a lot of pull in our political system. But again, the structure was a little iffy. Tim, why? Again, I talk about that in a supplementals episode if you want to check out more. Then I read two books by Colin Woodard. Union, The Struggle to Forge the Story of U.S. Nationhood, which is a really interesting book about, it is a history book about how the history of America has been written, specifically the historians and the reasons for why they wrote what they wrote, including a very interesting turn. Like for me, I think about, westward expansion, the American dream, that's very big in history books I learned from. That is a choice that someone made in a less distant future than you think. That was interesting. It had a slow beginning with a good ending. Then I read American Nations, A History of the 11 Rival Regional Cultures of North America. This is arguably the book that Colin Woodard is most famous for. And I would say, having now read 3 of his books, another one will come up later, the most interesting, and really makes a lot of sense thinking about just how big and the different histories of different kinds of places in America and how we can all be one country and yet so different. This had a strong beginning with a lackluster ending though, so do with that what you will. Then I read Lauren Lane's new book. She published a new book this year called Made in Manhattan. I did an ARC review of that. It was very sweet, very cute. I still think some of Lauren's stuff was her earlier books, but this was very sweet. It's like a reverse My Fair Lady situation, which I was not super thrilled about that concept, but as usual, Lauren sold it to me. You can check out my review for more. Then I read 6 books by Claire Kingsley in her Bailey Brothers series. Technically, at the time, there was 4 books. A 5th book in the series has recently been published. The 5th one that I read is like this opening novella, which gives you some backstory about the couple that is in the first book. So that novella is protecting you, and then there's fighting for us, unraveling him, rushing in, and chasing her fire. These are very sweet books about brothers in a small town and the women that they fall in love with. However, Chasing Her Fire was a couple book that this couple had been talked about, and they had been set up in all of the novella and the earlier novels. And I was so excited for their story, and then it turned into a surprise pregnancy trope, and I really thought it let them down. So it took me a really long time to finish the series, which I just did. And it was a good series ender, but my most anticipated couple was a blah. So, but small towns, brothers, hijinks, mysteries, historical mysteries. I do like Claire Kingsley, so they may be something for you to check out. Then I finished First Principles, What America's Founders Learned from the Greeks and Romans and How That Shaped Our Country by Thomas Ricks. This book was something I checked out on a lark. I was not expecting to enjoy it, but then I realized that it was a book about how the education of the founders, and specifically the different education of 4 specific founding fathers, Hamilton, Madison, Jefferson, and Washington, impacted their views on America in the beginning, how they helped craft the nation. It was really interesting. It's the impact of education on our union, and I really enjoyed it. It was probably a little bit dry for people who aren't me, but I thought it was really cool, and that does show up in another supplemental. Then I read 2 books by Elizabeth O'Rourke, A Deal with the Devil and The Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. These are connected. The devil is not the same. I almost didn't realize they were connected because they weren't connected on Kindle Unlimited. So if you run into that, beware. I remember liking these, but I don't remember anything about the plot line. So do with that what you will. Then I read Lease on Love by Fallon Ballard. I really thought that this was going to be like a Flatshare by Beth O'Leary knockoff, because it has a very, very similar premise of a girl who randomly ends up being roommates with this guy who's very socially awkward, and I was like, the Flatshare already did this really well. But this book stands on its own so strongly. It's so sweet. It's so cute. I did a full review of it, but I just feel the need to once again apologize to Fallon Ballard for being like, this is going to be a Flatshare knockoff. I'm glad I gave it a chance because it definitely is super cute on its own. Then I read 2 books by L.J. Shen. The first was The Devil Wears Black, and the second was In the Unlikely Event. So The Devil Wears Black is very interesting. It has a very unique structure. It went longer than I thought it would in a good way. I really like books that explore what happens after some other books will just say, and they lived happily ever after because they got together or something. So I really liked The Devil Wears Black. In an Unlikely Event just made me uncomfortable. I don't really want to get into the details of why, but they were two very starkly separate experiences. And yeah. Ugh. And then I read His Royal Highness by R.S. Gray. I don't think the guy was actually royalty, but other than that, I genuinely can't remember. It was just a filler book to get the taste of In the Unlikely Event out of my mouth. Then I finally finished the Bridgerton series, which I was buddy reading with my friend Erica. There is a very long video that exists with me discussing all of them, but I finished off in January On the Way to the Wedding by Julia Quinn, and there's a really interesting thing that goes on in these books where the first couple of books are really good. Erica and I think that book 2, which is Anthony and Kate's story, very different from what they do in the show, but whatever, is the best book. And then it kind of dips. And then in the end with Hyacinth and Gregory's story, Gregory being the last Bridgerton, they get very sweet and cute. So I'm really glad that we stuck it out and finished the series. You can watch that video for more. I finished January with The British Are Coming by Rick Atkinson. This is part 1 in a series on the American Revolution that Atkinson is writing. It had won an audiobook prize. I didn't know what that meant. What it ended up being is that it is one of the most engaging audiobooks I've ever listened to. So I highly recommend it. And I really wish that the other 2 books were already out, even though it's not like spoilers, right? I know who's gonna win the American Revolution, but the way that this book is written, it's just really, really engaging. So if you are looking for a good, engaging history book, whether you get it on audio or not, highly recommend. Check out a supplemental for more. I kicked my camera. It's fine. So in February, again, I read 20 books, and I started out with The Cause, The American Revolution and Its Discontents by Joseph Ellis. I talk about this in the supplementals that I featured it in, and I felt really bad because I read The Cause around the same time I read the Atkinson and the H.W. Brands. And The Cause, it's a very, I think, succinct view of the overarching themes of the American Revolution and what happened and why it happened. But because, particularly with the Atkinson, I was so invested in very significant details that it just seemed pale in comparison. That's probably an unfair review. If you want to read it, go forth and be free. I then read 3 more books by Olivia Hale: Arrogant Boss, Look But Don't Touch, and A Ticking Time Boss. At least a couple of these were supposed to be related to series I had started last year. I don't remember. They're billionaire romances. They are filler. They're good filler. I like her books, but they're filler. I then started a series by Carrie Elks called Winterville. I read Welcome to Winterville and Hearts in Winter. This is set in a place, a town in which it is like always Christmas, like a touristy town, and the hijinks of the family that kind of own and run it. I didn't finish the series. The first book was okay. The second book was kind of trite. I just really wasn't interested in continuing it. I also really don't like Christmas books. Christmas romances are a bridge too far from me most of the time. Then I finished Midnight in Washington by Adam Schiff. This is a book by the Democratic representative, one of the Democratic representatives from California, who was the impeachment manager of Trump's first impeachment. And this is his story really about how we get to the insurrection. And I was not sure how I was going to react to this book, but it was much more high level and less partisan. I'm not gonna say it wasn't partisan, you know it's partisan, but it was less partisan and more historical and interesting than I expected. So I'm glad that I read it. It was interesting, I guess. There is supplemental where I talk about that more. Then I read A Not So Meet Cute by Megan Quinn. I remember nothing about this. Nothing at all. I do think that the fault there lies with the book I read after that, which was Damaged Grump by Nicole Snow. This is another book in the Grump series by her that I've been reading. The first couple of books were really good, and the last two have been awful. I have not enjoyed them. I don't know how that series came crashing to such a cruddy end. The first two books are great, the other two were not. The character, no. Then I read 5 books by Max Monroe in 2 different series. The first is the Winslow Brothers, which is The Bet and The Pact. And there is another one coming out this year called The Secret. And I'm mad that it's not out because I really do like that series and I'm very interested in that story. However, I'm worried that by the time The Secret comes out, I will have forgotten most of the salient details of the plot because most of them are already out my head. Billionaire bad boys are tapping the billionaire, scoring the billionaire, and banking the billionaire. These are more basic billionaire romances. Kindle Unlimited sucks because once you read one type of book, it is all it recommends to you and it's really hard to find more. So sometimes I read these just because I'm tired of seeing them. Max Monroe ended up working out well for me, but just, yeah. Then for school, I read The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is a multi-award winning middle grade book about a boy who was raised by ghosts in a graveyard. I have some interesting thoughts about this book because I had heard so much about it going into it, and then when we had our discussion in class, I think we found some bits of it that were more problematic than I expected, but all in all, it is a beautifully written book. Everything by Neil Gaiman is going to be beautifully written, but I do question the ending. So maybe someday I'll make a full review on that, but that day is not today. We're just moving right along. So 2 more books in February, 1 nonfiction and 1 fiction. The nonfiction was Unthinkable by Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin was the impeachment manager of Trump's second impeachment, but more emotionally, his son killed himself after a very long battle with depression at the end of 2020. And so January 6, 2021 was his first day back at work, literally having just buried his son. And he has a much more emotional, a much more partisan story than, say, Adam Schiff. But he talks a lot about mental health and also how he found his way back to believing in this country after all of that having happened. It made me cry multiple times. It is not a book to read if you do not want explicit discussions of suicide. Obviously, his son is a very big presence in his life. But I think it was just really good. It made me cry. It made me cry. And is in a supplemental if you want more. And then finally, Count Your Lucky Stars by Alexandria Bella Fleur. Michaela and I buddy read the first book in this series, and then I read the second and third books. The first book that we read was a sapphic romance that we enjoyed. It wasn't great, but it was good. The second book was a straight guy and a bi girl who get together, and that one was not good. I did not enjoy that. The characters were just extra cheesy. It felt forced. Didn't like. This third one is another sapphic romance, and it is a second chance romance. There's more interesting things going on with both of the characters. So if you're going to read this series, skip the middle one. And the first 2, I think, are really great, 1, 2 hits, because they get better as it goes on. So, all right, March. March was 18 books, starting with Bad Cruise by L.J. Shen. Remember that person who I was like, I had to read a book just to get the taste of that one book out of my mouth? Bad Cruise was worse. It was worse. Did not enjoy. It was not good. It made me uncomfortable. No. I read another Colin Woodard also after that, American Character, the struggle between collectivism and individualism in America. This was interesting. It was published in 2016, so the entire time as he's talking about the ebb and flow in America between our individualistic and our collectivist tendencies, I was like, okay, but I need an updated version of this that includes COVID, because I feel like this is another flashpoint in that ebb and flow situation that's really interesting to put in the historical context that he's using. So it's not a bad book, it's a really interesting book, but the entire time I was like, I want more, which is unfair. Woodard published it when he published it, but that was my feeling. Then for school, I reread Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a memoir in verse about her time growing up in the South as a African-American girl and then moving to New York, and the travel and her family and the things that happened to her. It's a beautiful multi-award winning verse novel. Highly recommend it. Then I finished Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montel. This book set me off down a rabbit hole of reading about cults. It has a really strong beginning where she talks about the cultish and specifically the language. This is not a book explaining the history of cults, even though she does get into some of them like Jonestown, but more talking about how we get caught by cults on a language level. And as someone who, that's part of my PhD, is this language level of our lives, I found it really interesting. The beginning was strong, the ending less so, but it was just a really interesting thing to chew on. Then I read The Summer Proposal by V. Keeland. I read every V. Keeland that comes out. They are perfectly wonderful, well put together books that don't take up my brain space. I believe this was a couple who says, we'll date for the summer, and then like the summer turns into happily ever after. I don't remember more than that. I like V. Keeland's books, but they don't really make an impression. Sorry. Then for school, I also read The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. I had to read this for school. I didn't want to. I have heard a lot of things about this book, but also about the author. And part of our discussion in class was about the author and his implications during the Me Too movement. But after knowing how many awards this book has won and stuff, I expected way more than I got. It's still really powerful. It's still really interesting. And when it was published, one of the few stories giving voice to this particular Native American experience. But If I Never Get Out of Here is a much better book, also written by a Native American man, and it's just better. It's way better. Then I read The Mogul and the Muscle by Claire Kingsley. This is more because and I'll talk about her at the end, I had found this author named Lucy Score, and she and Pippa Grant and Claire Kingsley and someone else whose name I forget had written this 4-book series where each one of them had written a book. And I was like, well, I actually like a lot of these authors, so I'll try it. I only read 2 of the 4. I'm very sorry. And this one was hers, and The Mogul and the Muscle. And what's interesting about these is that all 4 female characters are billionaires, and the guys that they date aren't necessarily, which is a flip you almost never see. But they were meh. I just mentioned her, led me to The Last Eligible Billionaire by Pippa Grant, which is her latest release. This one was quite funny. It made me laugh, and it was about the guy in this case is literally the last eligible billionaire in the world, and he has all of these women trying to catch him, and then this woman accidentally ends up in his house. They have a really awful not meet cute, and she is just super unimpressed by him. And so it's fairly a basic setup, but it was really, really funny, and I enjoyed that. Then I slogged my way through The Hemmingses of Monticello by Annette Gordon-Reed. This is one of the seminal texts on the Hemmings family, whose most famous member is Sally Hemings, who was the enslaved mistress of Thomas Jefferson. But this is really the story of the entire family and what happened to them during their time at Monticello, and how through their family we can examine slave life in America's early beginnings. It's really interesting, but it's really dense. It is so dense, and it's repetitive too. So while I believe this book to be very important, I would caution you that if you start it, you have to just be prepared to just settle in, because it is a hard reading experience. Then I read Fool Me Once by Ashley Winstead. This is one of the most interesting and thought-provoking romance novels that I think maybe I've ever read. I did a full ARC review of it. I have a lot of thoughts. Even that review is just a little bit confused, and I think it has a lot of things to say to the romance genre, but it undercuts its attempted message by being a part of the romance genre and therefore having to go back to a happy ending. So it's a second chance where she cheats on him prior to the novel beginning. It sets you up with a lot of thoughts and feelings, and the book is very nuanced, but it just, there's a lot to think about in it. So I do recommend it just so you can talk about it with me, because I still have conflicting feelings. So now we're going to talk about the 5 Lucy Score books that I read this year. It started off with The Worst Best Man, and this one is an enemies to lovers of the maid of honor at a wedding and the best man at a wedding, and they get off on a totally wrong foot, and then like the groom is kidnapped, but that's only like the introduction to this story. Like, it just, there's a lot happening in this book, and it made me laugh a lot. And that is the series that got me to The Price of Scandal, which is the book that comes before Claire Kingsley's The Mogul and the Muscle. And I liked The Price of Scandal, I liked The Mogul and the Muscle, but I didn't really feel like continuing that series, so I read another Lucy Score book called The Undercover Lover. This one was not as good. I didn't really like it, and I was like, oh, was The Worst Best Man just kind of like a one-off? Was it just funny? I'm not really gonna like any of this other stuff. But then she has this duet that I read called Mr. Fixer-Upper and The Christmas Fix, and we've already gone over that I don't like Christmas books. I think Christmas romances are too much. So when I say that this book, the first one is about the brother who is like, it's like an HGTV show where they go and they like fix up homes and, you know, for families in need or whatever. The brother is the main character with his girlfriend in the first one, and then the sister with her then boyfriend is the second one. And those are really funny and really well written. So if you want a very sweet HGTV style romance set with a Christmas book, I recommend those. If you're still here, thank you. That was a lot of books. That was so many books. I'm actually tired just thinking about how many books that was. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. I'm very tired. I'm really stressed out. But I will hopefully see you for another actual review video when my brain is more screwed on. Let's see. Thanks, guys. Bye.